Welcome to the Social Justice War Room, the podcast where we look at social justice in fiction, reality, and everything in between. My guest today is a friend from the Webs Comics community who's also done a lot of multimedia work. You can see his work at the Trueniverse, named for the true core thread that runs through it all. We'll get to that. Please welcome Tripp Gustin. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Neil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the work you've done is superb, and especially with the True Colors comic, really moving. How
Thank you.
would you kind of pitch the whole entirety of what you're doing? Because there's several projects on your site, and some of them aren't comics per se, but like text adventures and flash games.
Yeah. So, yeah, kind of like you were saying before, kind of the umbrella term that I've come up with for my stuff is like the Trueniverse. So it's like trueniverse.com. But basically, it all started with True Colors, which I'd been planning for since like college, as kind of a coming of age story. It deals with four kids who kind of most of them meet on the first day of college and dealing with freshman orientation. And it's sort of an exploration of identity and coming of age as they kind of like grapple with their pasts and decide who they want to be in the future. And so that's kind of what started it off, just, pulling a lot of inspiration from other comics that I've enjoyed in the past, like Azumanga Daioh and different coming of age stories. And so, a lot of it kind of came from there and me wanting to kind of explore other elements of the world, because even though True Colors is kind of a pretty straightforward coming of age story dealing with kids in like a college setting, there's also like some kind of sci-fi elements in the world. Like we alluded to before, there's this like huge corporation called True Corp, that kind of is sort of an undercurrent in True Colors, but takes a center stage in other comics like Corpset, which is pretty inspired by other like interactive fiction like MS Paint Adventures, such as Homestuck and Problem Sleuth, and then just other things online like Kid Rad, dealing with like animation and some like meta elements. And so that one's kind of like more sci-fi based. And after that one wrapped up in 2019, I want to say, I started Input Quest, which is another kind of interactive story that's all based off of the idea of like randomness, but it's kind of got some of similar elements, and it's not revealed quite yet how it ties into like everything else in the world, but it will eventually.
Yeah, it's good that you started with True Colors to kind of create an emotional core for your work, because the first arcs deal with some extremely heavy themes and some characters who have very dysfunctional relationships as a result of the way they've been raised.
Definitely. And that's something I always really like in stories and want to reflect on my own, even if it's a story that's about like sci-fi stuff or kind of more comedy based or whatever. Like I feel like it always comes back to the characters. Not like necessarily every story has to do that, but I like that for mine. And so yeah, there's a lot of, especially in True Colors, gets into questions about sexuality and gender expression, also like trauma and abuse. I try not to get like too graphic with stuff in the story, but definitely like dealing with like domestic violence and attachment issues and codependency and stuff like that. Just as ways to kind of some stuff is like drawn from my life, some is drawn from other people that I've known, and it's just kind of one of those things of art exploring the human condition and kind of different topics that are near and dear to me.
There's definitely a way in which art can uniquely show people what it's like and why these things are important, because they make you feel what the characters are feeling. And so it's really hard not to empathize with someone who's being mistreated for their gender identity, or someone who's afraid of their own father and his rages.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going through your work for preparing for this podcast, I noticed with Corpset how in the background of the college, Truman University, is the Truman family's true core. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's kind of, and it honestly wasn't even planned that much from the start, but sort of an element that's like increasingly grew the more that I was telling the story was kind of the TrueCorp element, which is this massive like technology company, equivalent to Google or Apple or Amazon, that has sort of like slowly developed a monopoly over like most industries. And so the university itself that True Colors takes place in is Truman University. And so, it's kind of explores different themes of like nepotism. And, one of the main characters is, you find out pretty quickly is like the heiress of the company. And so, part of the story is her dealing with like her own privilege, like both, from a class standpoint, but also, sociopolitically, racially, et cetera. And so, that's something that the theme started to like develop organically the more that I was telling it, and it's sort of become like a core fixture in like most of the stories, is sort of that like question of like corporatism and like how do you like respond to like a university, which is supposed to be like a neutral environment for learning, but if it's being run by corporate interests that are using the student body as basically test subjects for new products, 3D food printing and things like that, how does that impact things? How does the administrative body, the dean or whoever else, like how do they best serve the students' interest if they're also having to answer to these like corporate powers that have mostly profit on the mind? So that's been kind of interesting to explore.
Yeah, especially since like a lot of the things that are outside the realm of reality are getting closer and closer to reality in ways that are tremendously unsubtle, like Elon Musk doing the brain implant chips.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's like honestly has been like planned in my comics for like before it became a real thing, and it was mostly the realm of science fiction, but like increasingly it's it's such a it's pretty hackneyed at this point, but it's like everything's basically Black Mirror at this point. That's just kind of how the way reality's going, and it's kind of disturbing to see, but
But
makes for a
that
lot of good
goes,
fiction, I guess.
yeah, but that goes into the themes of choice, and especially in the interactive parts, how you don't really have choices. Like with Input Quest, I found all the paths I could take were just randomized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to kind of explain a little bit more the concept of Input Quest, with Corpset, that was sort of, I mentioned before, it's like inspired a lot by a lot of like hypermedia stories and like interactive stories. Comics like Homestuck and Problem Sleuth sort of, they incorporated like reader commands where readers could submit text to tell the characters what to do, and ultimately the story is up to the author. So I kind of like took inspiration from that, and so for a lot of Corpset, a lot of the things in the story are things that the readers were submitting and telling the characters to do. And, I could either like have it, play that straight and have the character just do that, or have the character decide not to do that and, kind of get some comedy off of that. But I really had fun with it. It was a very like interactive, like improvisational creative exercise, and like figuring out how to like make a coherent story based off of, that kind of interplay with the reader. And I really enjoyed that. And I felt like it was like, something that it's like a kind of a new, exciting way of telling a story that you don't really see as much with, if someone's just writing a novel or making a movie or whatever, it's just the creator's vision and it's presented as is. But, with a serialized story like that, especially one on the internet, that's such a like democratized, medium, you can really have a lot of fun with, kind of having that interactivity. So with Input Quest, I took that a step further, and, people still submit reader commands the same way, but to continue to like make it even more of an improvisational exercise for myself, I basically like do a random number generator. I'll like take the commands, like usually in the order that I get them. And like it changes depending on like it's like presented as like a faux video game, but like the first path, it's like between one of 3 options, and the second path, it's between one of 6 options. And I literally will just like I'll assign a number to each of the commands that I've gotten, 1 through 6 currently. And I'll roll the random number generator 1 through 6, and like whatever it lands on, that's what I have to do. So it's been a kind of an interesting, one, just creatively, like kind of, it's a lot like running a tabletop game, for example, where, except there's like all the readers are the players, and I'm having to like, react to like what they're doing. But also, it's been interesting to explore those themes and what that means for the characters, to, the characters sort of not having a choice. It's presented like it's their free will, but if you read it, you'll kind of see there's like some ways that like the question of that free will starts to be pulled into question. And also like the narrator kind of becomes a character after a while. And the narrator, it starts to seem like maybe has their own desires for what the character should do. So that kind of idea of, free will and choice has been fun to play with.
And this really impressed me that there's a entire side-scrolling game in one of the chapters where your character is shrunk down in the middle of the woods and has to navigate the world with much comparatively larger insect and squirrel enemies. And like, you didn't have to go to that much depth to make it. Like, you made the game in Unity, and it has several levels, and it has different paths on the levels with that play into the kind of risk versus reward gameplay loop that games are designed around. Like, what inspired you to go that far?
Yeah, so that was honestly, that's been part of what's fun about kind of playing with is like more experimental storytelling things is, and I've been inspired a lot by, again, like, different webcomics that also incorporate like Flash games and things like that, or, not Flash anymore, but or HTML5 games. Because if you're telling a story on the web, you can really format it however you want. You can incorporate animation, you can incorporate sound. And so like playing with the idea of just having like literally it's just one panel is an entire like side scrolling game, which I did partly because it was just like a cool way to, again, like that idea of choice, like it makes the player like literally be able to control the character and have them, not just submit a command, but actively control their actions. So it's kind of feeding into those themes still. And then also just, on a personal level, like I've always really liked video games. I've always been like kind of interested in making video games. And so I like did a tutorial on udemy.com that was like, make your own 2D side scroller. And I kind of just like went through that tutorial and, used my own assets and music and sprite work and stuff to kind of make something original. So it's just been a fun way of like, expanding my own creative capabilities in a way that's, because I don't know, I'm definitely the kind of person who like gets bored doing the exact same thing like too much, which can be a problem because it means I have like multiple webcomics going at once and, maybe should just focus on one if I was to get them all updated at a decent rate. But it's, I never stay bored. So it's been cool to be able to experiment with like different mediums and, do new things. So I'd like to make more stuff like that in the future. I think would be fun.
Well, it's unique, and I like the idea that you're experiencing different parts of the story from different mediums. I mean, that's something that a lot of big video game companies try to do, like with Final Fantasy, how Final Fantasy 15 had like a CG movie and an anime series and an app and an 8-bit beat 'em up, as well as the main game, but most of those were not good.
Yeah.
So with this, the advantage is that it's all your voice and your direction coming through. But of course, on the flip side, you're not a huge video game company with billions of dollars to funnel into these projects. So,
right.
And especially in terms of time, like, how do you manage the time you have to create your own stuff and allocate it to these different things, which I imagine all have their own learning curves?
For sure. I mean, how do I manage it? Poorly a lot of the time, but it's a balance. It's definitely been a struggle because like right now I'm actually like last year I decided to go back to school to pursue a degree in animation, which has been really cool and has allowed me to expand my skill set further with like learning how to 3D model and things like that. We're actually there's a global game jam this weekend that my class is participating in. So I'll be able to kind of like expand my video game development knowledge even more through that. So that's been really cool. But yeah, I mean, historically, like I've been working on True Colors for, I think since like 2011 or 12. So like that's like a decade that, most of it I've been, working full time. So having to balance, a day job with working on comics. I mean, honestly, I have to treat it like a second job a lot of the times with, varying degrees of success. Cause sometimes I just, depending on what's going on in life, I don't always have the time to devote to my comics or games as much as I'd like to, but it's a passion project, and I always feel bad because I'd like to be able to maintain a like very steady update rate, but sometimes it's just not feasible. So trying to like extend that like grace towards myself that, I'm just working on it as much as I can, because it's a passion of love, or a labor of love, and, trying to devote the time to it that it deserves. But, sometimes there's just not enough hours in the day. And if I didn't have to sleep, I would, definitely just spend all night working on my own stuff. But
that sounds like a thread you could pursue in a Black Mirror episode involving brain chips. And of course,
totally.
it'd go horribly, horribly wrong, as it always does.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't need more story ideas because I've already got like tons on the back burner. But, that's definitely a theme that I could work with, is just, not having enough hours in the day versus, everything you want to do.
Yeah. And speaking of technology and mediums, one concern that's come up, especially in recent years, is how these multimedia projects will persist in the future when the hosts go down. Like Flash is gone, and that means a lot of things created in Flash are no longer supported. Mm-hmm. Do you think about that at all, or is that too far in the future for you to think about? Or
I mean, I've thought about it to a degree. I always, if nothing else, I always try to do a really good job of like backing up all my work, because I mean, that's the thing with any kind of digital media, is like in some ways it can last forever, and that it can be like replicated, indefinitely, but also it can also be lost forever. So trying to, make sure I have like a lot of redundancy with like my backups and everything. And also, so I'll like mirror the comics different places. But yeah, I mean, there's to a certain degree, it's something I think about some, but also it's the sort of thing where like I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. If, because the game that I made, it's, made in Unity, but also it's like HTML5. So, hopefully that format will continue to be standard, for a while. But, if it becomes obsolete, like, I would like my work to last forever, but also, arguably nothing lasts forever. So if it ends up being like a transitory thing, I don't feel like it's the end of the world. But hopefully at least like, something like True Colors, which is more of a traditional comic, or, the ones that are more just, a picture with text, can at least hopefully be backed up and, preserved in other ways. I would at some point like to make like print versions of my work, which, will be a little trickier with the ones that are more like animated and interactive, but, I like the idea of it, taking different forms. But yeah, it's definitely a concern, because I've seen like other comics just be like lost forever on the internet if the websites aren't maintained, or the format like Flash is no longer around. So it's just something to, I guess, be aware of. And if you'd like your work to last forever, definitely it's the kind of thing you gotta take precautions for.
Yeah, because even though they're backed up on the servers of these huge companies, they're still at the mercy of whoever owns said companies.
Right. Yeah. So definitely, like local storage and things like that. Like I have like an external hard drive that I back up everything on, and have for years. But also, who knows, there could be a flood or something. And so, you can do your best to back up stuff, but at past a certain point, there's only so much you can do. So I think it's just a matter of doing your best.
Well, the future is uncertain, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I did really enjoy going through your work again, as I've done several times for previous things, like when I was doing fan art of your work.
And you.
I always enjoy doing so. And with the current arc in the True Colors comic, it seems to be focused on Sonia, who's heiress to this Truman dynasty, but she's also incredibly shy and withdrawn. So without giving away more than you feel comfortable giving away, like how's that going to play out?
Sure. So, yeah, like the current chapter is, so kind of the way that True Colors is formatted is there's 5 main chapters, or there will be. And then like in between each main chapter that takes place in the present day, there's also an interlude chapter that it focuses on a backstory of one of the 4 main characters. So far it's gotten through Eero's backstory, and then also Kit's backstory. And so the next ones would be Ben and then Sonia. So the current chapter 3, has been a little bit of a it's been more of a challenge because it's the first one where like basically all 4 of the main characters are split up, which has sort of expanded it. It's probably going to be one of the longer chapters just because it's tough to like cover as much ground as I want in a short amount of time. But kind of Sonia's journey at the moment is, she has these family expectations. Her grandmother is like the current CEO and owner of True Corp, and because her parents are no longer around. But she has all these expectations from her grandmother, especially to be in this like business sorority, Delta True, that is will have all the good connections and things like that, and and feels all this pressure to like live up to her family's expectations. She's like a business major, but you definitely get the sense pretty quickly that it's not necessarily what she is that passionate about. So a lot of her story is about that interplay between like living up to family expectations, but also being true to herself, hence true colors. It's kind of a running theme throughout the whole thing. But also, grappling with that privilege and, the fact that like a lot of people don't like her because of her family and who she is. And it's a lot of stuff that, is outside of her control, because she didn't choose what family she was born into, but also it's something that she benefits from as, the daughter of basically the most wealthy family on earth. And so it's sorry, go on.
There's also, of course, as this true core tech stuff and the more sinister aspects of it start creeping into the true color story proper, the fact that she's basically under constant surveillance.
That too, yeah. I mean, there's like there's security cameras everywhere. Like there's a couple of panels at one point that show her grandmother just basically watching her, and also her new friends that she just made, and doing like background checks on, her new friends, making sure that Sonia is making friends with like the right people. So that kind of element of trying to micromanage Sonia's social life is definitely a big theme, and something that, again, not to get too personal, but, certain things resonate with my own life and background. But, and also, other things with Sonia is, her grappling with the fact that like not everyone is going to like her, but also like what she can do about it. And also, kind of some ideas of like, with great power comes great responsibility. Like, does she want to take on the mantle of like the heiress of this huge company? And if she does, like, what is she going to do with it? Like, is she just going to carry on her family's, current trajectory? Is she going to try to make positive changes? Is it even possible to make positive changes, through like the mechanisms of like corporate control? Like, is it possible to have a like good CEO of a like massive technology corporation? Like, that's all stuff that's going to be kind of explored in the future.
Yeah, and right now it seems like in reality the answer is pointing to a hard no.
Yeah, well, don't want to give anything away too much, but I'm going to explore a few different angles of it, especially as True Corp becomes a big fixture in the world. To kind of, I guess, give a little bit of a hint, because I think I've talked about it elsewhere, so it's not like huge spoiler, but like one of the next stories I'd like to do is focused pretty heavily on like, it will be a like time travel sci-fi story, and it would take place about like, almost like 400 years in the future, when basically True Corp rules the world. And so there'll be, I want all the stories to stand on their own and be able to be enjoyed on their own, but there'll definitely be like some hints as to, what happened with Sonia and, what choices she made, one way or another, and how that's kind of like branched off and impacted like the development of the human race, essentially.
And it's hard to argue whether or not anyone can really make their own choices in these kind of conditions.
Yeah, true. Because, everyone is the product of, their upbringing and their environment, and, they're making choices based on, what's being asked of them in the moment. So, there's definitely a lot of elements like that at play as well.
Yeah, well, it's been great having you on, and I definitely look forward to when you can get back to doing more True Colors. But also I want to urge you and remind my own audience that you're doing this as a passion project, and any time you can spare for it under the circumstances of school and work is a gift to the rest of us.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's definitely one of my goals to try and be able to chip away at it a little bit more this year.
Well, thanks for coming on, Tripp Gustin, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.